she was like, change?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please come in and find a seat. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you all to the Illinois State Bilingual Directors Meeting of 2021 in person. We are so grateful that you all came out and that you are here to learn and to network and to really help our English learners across the state. I want to specifically say thank you to the Illinois Resource Center for putting this wonderful event together. It is a lot of hard work, and they have really been paying attention to the details. So thank you, IRC and Josie. So a few reminders before we really get started. Please always wear your masks and maintain social distancing, except when you're stuffing food in your face. Certain sessions throughout the day will be recorded and shared through Crowd Compass later. And everyone should have received a swag bag with some hand sanitizer, an extra mask, and some books. There's also, if you noticed, you've all been marked or tagged. You have a dot on your badge. A blue dot signifies a brand new director, someone with less than 3 years of experience. A yellow dot is a director with 3 to 5 years of experience, and a red dot is an experienced director. We were going to say old director, but nobody's really old in this room. And green dots is for everyone else. Now, if you have a blue dot, please stand up.
These are all the new ones.
Experienced directors, please be kind to these people. Take them under your wing and help them, especially when they're looking around really confused. Yellow and red dots, please stand up.
Good idea. That's a cool idea.
New directors, please ask these wonderful people your questions. They do want to help. Green dots, there's not so many, but if you have a green dot, stand up. These are staff of the IRC or ISB staff or people who are here that can help answer questions as well. So don't hesitate to ask. All right. So I'd like to share some updates about the Multilingual Department. And before I begin, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Joanne Clyde. I'm the director of the Multilingual Department. I have been with ISB now for just over a year and a half-ish. I started February 2020, spent less than a month in the office, and then we went on pandemic. So last year's Bilingual Directors Conference meeting, if you attended, was all virtual. Before going to ISB, I worked as the bilingual director in Tinley Park for 5 years, and then before that I was an ESL bilingual teacher for 10. So I have close to 20 years experience in education. So that's enough about me. You guys don't really care, but I just want you to understand that I've been where you've been. I understand the problems that we're going through. So in the Multilingual Department, we have 5 main programs that we oversee, and some of these are new additions. We have EL Bilingual, including Title III, which is probably the program that all of you are the most familiar with. We also oversee our Migrant Education Program, which provides services for agricultural migratory students. We have the Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy, visiting international teachers, and world language and ethnic language schools. Now, the world languages and ethnic language schools is a new addition to multilingual. Previously, World language was handled by our Standards and Instruction Department, and ethnic language schools were handled by our non-public. So, because we have so many new directors, I want to just give a very brief overview of each of those programs. The Multilingual Department provides leadership, advocacy, and support to districts, parents, and policymakers by promoting equitable access to language support services to students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds who have been identified as English learners. This includes technical assistance for districts, grant and plan reviews and approvals, program compliance monitoring, and professional development. When I started at the agency in February 2020, we had 5 principal consultants in the department. We are now up to a total department of 12. So we have doubled the number of principal consultants in the multilingual department. Now, I almost asked my team to send me a picture or a Bitmoji for this part, but I was kind to them. So on our grants and technical assistance team, we have Sang Nao Hu, Beth Robinson, Sonia Serrano, Lydia Kvinta, Trevor Cottle, and Madeline Polovic. On our compliance monitoring team, we have Edwin Sanchez Molina, Tamara Kohout, Penny Franzman, Jonathan J. Reynoso, Asma Defala, and Ivan Jablonski. We have other multilingual staff. Claudia Valencia is our visiting international teacher recruiter. Alexis Sukierski is our program specialist, and then me, the director. And I put myself last because honestly, all the other team members' work is far more important than mine. So, migrant education programs. A lot of you, and I know I did this too when I was a bilingual director, and in suburban Chicago, I went, this doesn't apply to me. Migrant education programs is a federally funded program to provide supplemental education and support services to migrant children. Funds are available to support projects in districts with a documented migrant student population. Now here's the thing. A student qualifies for migrant education for 3 years after a qualifying move. And they could be living in one place and their parents are doing the moving. So you might have a student living with their auntie and uncle in Blue Island who qualifies for migrant. But the problem is we have a very difficult time identifying them, so we need your help. There's going to be a session later today, I believe, on migrant education. And there's also flyers about the migrant education program. We encourage you to learn a little bit more about this and see how you can help. I would also add, as I've been at ISB and I've learned more about the migrant program, these students are probably some of the most at-risk students in the state. Highly mobile, interrupted education, low income, problems accessing health care. Many are English learners and also have special education needs. They may be traveling with their parents or staying with family members. So I really encourage you all to help us find these students who need extra support. The Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy and the State Commendation toward Biliteracy is an amazing program. High school seniors can earn this seal or commendation that goes on their diploma and transcripts. And if they earn the Seal of Biliteracy, they can get college credit at Illinois institutions of higher education. There is an application process. Districts reach out to us. We have our application for public school districts is on SIS, and there's a webinar you watch. You need to identify someone who's going to do the coordination in your district, and you fill out the application. It's pretty easy, and it has such benefit to encouraging bilingualism in our students and honoring the linguistic skills that they have. Our Visiting International Teacher Program is also a really exciting part of the Multilingual Department. The Illinois State Board of Education is designated as a sponsor of an exchange visitor program by the U.S. Department of State. This designation allows ISB to sponsor teachers from other countries, also known as Visiting International Teachers, to teach in Illinois through the exchange visitor program. We have had a 20-plus year-long partnership with the Ministry of Education of Spain. This past year, we signed MOUs with the Medina Ramos Group to bring bilingual teachers from Mexico to Illinois. And we have signed an MOU with an organization in Morocco to bring Arabic-speaking teachers starting next year. We are currently working on other partnerships with other countries. And if you have contacts in other countries, consulates, or in another country's education system, and you'd like us to try to bring teachers from that school, we need contacts. So please share them with us. There will be a presentation today about the VIT program from Claudia Valencia on our team. And then tomorrow, the representative from the Ministry of Education of Spain, Carlos Barospe Peralta, will be also giving a presentation. So I highly encourage you who are looking to find bilingual teachers to attend those sessions. World languages, we provide department technical assistance and oversight related to world language programs. And then ethnic language schools. This was also something else that I wasn't completely 100% aware of before coming to ISB. An ethnic language school is a part-time private program that teaches the foreign language of a particular ethnic group, as well as the culture, geography, history, and other aspects of the culture of that ethnic group. So this would be like your Saturday Polish schools, or your Hebrew schools, or your Arabic schools. These private organizations may get accreditation from the Illinois State Board of Education, and then if the public school agrees, the local public school has to agree to this, the students who attend that ethnic language school can get world language credit for the work that they do in the ethnic language school. So if you have questions about any of these programs, please reach out to the Multilingual Department. We'll be happy to answer your questions. We have updated our multilingual website. We are still updating our multilingual website. And we first did a reorganization of what was there. One of my biggest complaints before I came to the ISB was it was so hard to find anything on the website. So it has been reorganized, and we are in the process of updating the content. So for those of you who had memorized how to get to where you needed to get to, I'm sorry. But hopefully it's going to be easier to find them in the future. We have also updated the licensure matrix. Many of you veteran directors are familiar with this. It has been updated to align with changes to code. So please check it out. It is now 4 pages long, but it should be much more easy to interpret. It contains information about what an individual can teach with various Pels and with an ELS VIT can teach given a particular endorsement. Each section covers grade bands such as early childhood, elementary, middle school, senior high, and what an individual with an ELS TBE may teach. The Licensure Department has also released 2 documents that are pathways for licensure. Now, this I think will be very beneficial to you who have teachers in your district who may want to get their ESL or bilingual endorsements, or teachers in your district that you want to have them get their ESL bilingual endorsement. So it outlines the various pathways to get them, including how to get a short-term approval once they've earned a certain number of credit hours. So on their way, they can get that short-term approval and start actually providing services. So this is some very good information for you. We are in the process of updating our placement and exit sample letters. They should be posted on the website soon. Now, as you know, it is very expensive to get things translated. So when we first put the updated letters up, it will only have 10 languages instead of the 40 that we're used to. But we have the next 10 already getting translated. So in about 2 to 3 weeks, those will be posted. Subsequently, the next 10 and then the next 10. So within 2 to 3 months, we should have all 40 languages back up on the website with updated information, as well as some new sample letters for you, including exit letters and a preschool notification. And I do recognize that it is October, and you all have already sent out your letters. So here's some assurance. If we happen to select you for compliance monitoring this year, we are not going to ding you if you're not using the most recent letters. So that should be reassuring. We highly encourage districts to update their notification letters. Even if you don't use our sample letters, please read through the updates once they're posted, because there have been some small changes to code, and you want to make sure that yours align with everything that ours has. Monitoring process. Now, some districts have already been notified that they are being monitored this year. We will not be posting a list of who will be monitored each year. We also will not be posting the findings and corrective action plans on our website like was done in the past. Our monitoring team worked hard to redesign our process during the pandemic. We now have 2 formats for monitoring, desktop and on-site. Districts will be selected for either desktop or on-site monitoring based on risk factors. More detailed information about the compliance monitoring process will be shared during the general session tomorrow. And I've already asked Josie to make sure there's no projectiles so that you cannot throw things at me. All I have pictured is that scene from Blues Brothers from the bar where they're just throwing things at the stage. Please be nice to me tomorrow. Spanish language arts standards. This is something that's been highly, highly, highly anticipated. The current status of the Spanish language arts standards is JCAR approval pending. JCAR is the Joint Committee for Administrative Rules. After the Board of Education passes a rule, it has to be approved by legislation in Springfield. We are currently awaiting that approval. I have been told that it should be imminent any day now, but I don't know. Once these are approved, districts will have 1 year to implement, resources will be posted on our website, other supports will be provided, and the SLA standards will be the basis for a Spanish language arts assessment for accountability purposes. So this is very exciting, and there's going to be sessions about this. So I want to give a quick preview of Tuesday's agenda, which is today. So we're going to have, you can see where I was thinking when I wrote this. So today's agenda, we're going to have a fantastic keynote, and I'm going to wait on explaining more about that to the person who's actually going to introduce the keynote. And then we've got some great ISB-led sessions. English learners, students, and evidence-based funding. We have sessions on braiding and blending funds, a look into the ISB's Visiting International Teacher Program, and an accountability session. We also have an elementary roundtable with veteran experienced directors talking about their experiences with elementary EL programs, and then a secondary roundtable, again, same thing, but with secondary directors. And then other session topics of note, so we're going to have an expanded keynote session, so if you're really interested in the keynote and want to learn more, there's going to be a session on the Spanish language arts standards, the kids assessment, LGBTQ and ELs, WIDA updates, refugee students, family engagement, and long-term ELs. Tomorrow, the keynote is really exciting. We're going to hear from Tyrone Martinez-Black from Castle on social, emotional, and English learners. ISB-led sessions, you're going to learn about compliance monitoring, and be kind to me. New standards and curriculum supports from ISB, access assessment updates, and high-impact tutoring. We're going to have a bilingual learners with special education needs roundtable, a new director's Q&A panel. Now this is going to be, I think, really beneficial. The very last session of the day is going to be back in here. And we have a panel of experienced directors. There's going to be ISB staff and IRC staff, because we realize for the new directors, by the end of tomorrow, you will have more questions than you did when you came. It's a given. So there is no agenda for this new director's Q&A. It is your questions to ask of us, and we will do our best to answer them. Experienced directors are welcome to attend, but we ask that you hang back a little and let the new directors ask their questions. And then other topics of note, again, an expanded keynote on social, emotional, and English learners, small group instruction, migrant education, opportunities for bilingual programs, and wordless picture books. At this time, I'm going to stop talking and introduce Sylvia Rohel, who is the Director of Partnerships and Strategic Planning at the IRC and the Center. She is one of the planners of this wonderful meeting, and she's responsible for getting the swag. So, Sylvia.
Yeah, go Sylvia.
Thank you, Joanne. Can you hear me? Am I close enough? Is this good? Okay. Good morning, everyone. As Joanne said, I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships. My name is Sylvia Rogel. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. It's been a long time, right? At least for us at the IRC. This is our first face-to-face event in what seems like a lifetime. But I have to say that it feels really good to be back to a face-to-face event. We're trying really hard to maintain the COVID safety precautions and maintain social distancing just as much as you all are doing in your respective districts. I want to give it up to all of you for all the hard work that you guys are doing. I can imagine little ones running around, boogers across their face, but they have to maintain their little, face covering. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing in your districts. Now, it is with great honor that I introduce to you our keynote speakers this morning. Presenting the groundbreaking new research on English learners in the early years and what it means for policy and practice, Marisa de la Torre is Managing Director and Senior Research Associate with the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. Her research interests include urban school reform, school choice, and early indicators of school success. Ms. de la Torre has examined the impact of school closings in Chicago, the effects of policies aimed to turn around low-performing schools, the impact of selective enrollment high schools, long-run trends on school indicators in Chicago, and which middle school indicators matter for success in high school and eventually in college. She has co-authored numerous journal articles and reports, and her work has also appeared in several book chapters. Her research is frequently covered in the local and national news media, including the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and local news public radio. Before joining the University of Chicago Consortium, Ms. de la Torre worked for the Chicago Public Schools in the Office of Research, Evaluation, and Accountability. Dr. Rebecca Vanderlak Navarro. She is Education Director at the Latino Policy Forum, whose mission is to build the power, influence, and leadership of the Latino community through collective action to transform public policies that ensure the well-being of the community and society as a whole. They also actively advocate for policies to support the successful political, social, and economic integration of Latino immigrants into our communities. They also advocate at the federal level for policies to fix the broken immigration system, which you, I'm sure, have seen firsthand with many of your students as well. Dr. Vanderlak Navarro leads a team that concentrates its efforts on promoting quality bilingual education programming, quality parent engagement, and equitable access to early childhood programming that is responsive to language and cultural difference. Her publications and advocacy efforts provide thoughtful considerations about the interconnectedness of language, literacy, and academic achievement. She recently co-authored the Illinois English Learner Handbook, a guide for school board members, school administrators, and principals. I have seen her speak at many, many meetings. I know her work very well, and I always walk away really feeling informed and empowered, and I'm sure you all will too. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Vanderlak Navarro and Ms. Marisa de la Torre. Thank you.
No pressure.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Okay, fantastic. It is a pleasure to be here. I really This is such a great opportunity for me to share my research with you. Although I have to confess that I'm a little bit nervous because whatever I'm going to share with you today, I'm sure you guys are going to say, we know that, we know that, we know that. I feel like it's kind of obvious, but I think it's good for us to put it on a paper and do research about it so that we can share it with the world. And Rebecca, my partner in crime doing this research, we have like big plans to really help to shape policy and practice, hopefully in the next few years. So thank you so much for having us in here. So we started this work like 2 years ago, I think. We did a prior research, a prior report in 2019, just giving a little bit of information about what the outcomes of English learners were in Chicago public schools. And I think it was just like a very simple report, but I think it really put on the map how well these students are doing in Chicago public schools, but I think this is true all over different districts, right? So then our next iteration of doing research, we decided to focus on preschool years and early grade years. And you know, all of you know that most of the EL students are concentrated in the early grades. So we thought, let's look at those early years, those fundamental years where it's easier maybe to do some kind of different strategies or interventions to support students that might need more help, right? So this is just a figure of the number of EL students in Chicago public schools in 2019-20, divided by different grades. So what you can see is like most of the students are between kindergarten and third grade. We start to see a decline after third grade. We know that the students become English proficient, right, throughout the number of years. Most research says that it takes between 5 to 7 years to really reach that academic English proficiency that is being tested in the Access exam. In CPS, we don't have that many pre-K seats, but these are the number of students that are attending different school-based CPS pre-K, right? But then we see a big increase in kindergarten and so on in the next few years. From our prior research, one thing that we discovered is if we follow students, English learners from kindergarten all the way to 8th grade, 3/4 of the students reach proficiency by 5th grade, but we still have 20% of the students that by the end of 8th grade year, despite of being continuously enrolled in CPS, do not reach English proficiency by the end of 8th grade. So that was, we thought that that number was large. I'm not sure what it looks like in your different districts, but we started to look at what are those differences that we see between those students that do not reach proficiency and those that do reach proficiency in the elementary grade years. And what you see in this graph is two different groups of students. The yellow line is 20% of the students that did not reach proficiency by 8th grade. The green line is students that reach proficiency by 3rd grade, which was like a large group of students in 3rd grade, in CPS. And what you see is like those differences, these are the different scores in the Access test that they take the different years. You start to see that those differences are evident even in kindergarten, right? So this motivated us to study the early grade years because what if we could identify those students early on and start providing supports so that their outcomes might look better in the future, right? And it's not only that they did not reach proficiency, right? Or English proficiency, but it's true that their attendance started to go down in the middle grades, despite being better than non-EL students. And the grades were also very low in their classes. So they were also having issues, right? Mastering the content of the different classes. So these are the two questions that we were trying to answer in the study that we just published last week. One is, what are the different factors associated with stronger outcomes for these students in the early grades? And to what extent can we actually identify those students that might need different strategies or supports early on, right? This study is only focused on English learners, so we want to see how different their outcomes are depending on different characteristics. And this is how the numbers look like. So we follow two different samples of students. The first column is the pre-K, students that were enrolled in pre-K, and then we can follow them to kindergarten. We have close to 14,000, a little bit over 14,000 students. And then we follow another sample from kindergarten all the way to 3rd grade. And we have more than 60,000 students that we were able to follow in that sample. And one thing that you notice, and I'm not sure how your districts might be different from CPS, but I offer this as a way for you to start thinking how different or similar things might look like in your district. So we have most of the students, 85% of the students that are English learners in CPS are Spanish speakers. But the rest, we have roughly 70 different languages spoken in CPS schools. Most of them are receiving free or reduced price lunch. And then we have large number of students also receiving special education. The number is large in pre-K because of the way the seats are allocated in CPS. We have more EL students that have an identified disability in pre-K. So that's just a way of situating, what type of students we are looking at in our sample. Okay, so first question is factors that are associated with better outcomes. And I'm going to highlight 2 of them. And you are going to tell me that you probably know this already. But I want to offer some numbers behind that, right? So just to put things in context. So the first one is preschool, right? Preschool seems beneficial for all the research that we see out there. Preschool is beneficial for everybody. It's also true for EL students, but especially those students that are attending a full day program. In CPS, only 19% of the EL students are attending a full day, while the rest of non-ELs, 34% are attending a full day program, just to give you an idea of how different those numbers look like between these 2 different groups of students. But attending preschool was associated with stronger learning outcomes and attendance for ELs. So as a way of giving you some numbers, I have this graph here that is showing us the percent of students that were proficient on the text reading and comprehension test that students in CPS take in the fall of kindergarten. And it's just showing what are those early literacy skills that the students get. And what we see is that the yellow bar, the students that were attending a half day pre-K, 39% of them reached that proficiency level in these early literacy skills, while 49% of the students who were attending a full day pre-kindergarten did so. So we see large differences between the students that attend full day versus half day, right? And it was also evident in other outcomes. Now, when we look at the students from kindergarten to 3rd grade, and then we look at whether you attended pre-K or not, and we have more than half of the students in our sample did actually attend pre-K. And one thing that I want to note is our pre-K is just a school-based CPS pre-K, so we are comparing kids to other kids that might have been in a private setting or a CBO or no pre-K whatsoever, right? We have no way of differentiating that, which is a pity. But regardless, students that attended a CPS school-based pre-K show differences in their outcomes even 3 or 4 years later, right? We follow them all the way to 3rd grade. And when we look at their outcomes in 3rd grade, we see higher attendance, we see better grades in their classes. When we look at their grades in math and reading classes, they have better grades. They have better scores in a standardized test, and they are more likely to demonstrate proficiency in Access by 3rd grade. So, an intervention that happened when they are 3 or 4, it continues and it still shows differences even by 3rd grade, right? So we think that is huge, right? And it's also evident in ELs. We knew that it was true for many other groups of students. It looks like it's also true for English learners. The second big key finding about factors that are associated with better outcomes is whether the students receive bilingual services. So in the long run, those students that receive bilingual services had a stronger attendance and academic outcomes. Now, in CPS, and across Illinois, right, you have all these different programs, TBE, TPI, and in CPS, we also have dual language programs, and I'm sure many of you also do have that. We were not able to differentiate very well among those different programs. And that's a question that we always get, right? And unfortunately, I think because we only follow students to 3rd grade, we don't find many differences, but we know that there are some differences depending on the program. But I think those probably show up later on in later grades, right? But here what I'm talking about is if we compare students that receive bilingual services program, compared to students whose families refused bilingual services, which amounts to being like in an English immersion situation, they have better, stronger academic outcomes and better attendance, right? In CPS, the number of families that refuse services is only 3%. It's a small number, but it's still significant, right? And I don't know how it looks across your different districts. But one of the things is like, it really shows big differences in their outcomes. And it's true, that in kindergarten, maybe the differences are not that evident. Maybe students that refuse services, they show better English proficiency when they are tested in access. But by third grade, those differences disappear. And students that receive bilingual services are actually more likely to reach English proficiency. 16% of them did. And 12% that refuse bilingual services reach proficiency, right? And it's not just English proficiency, right? That's just one outcome. But what we care about is all the things that are happening in the school. And what we also saw is that by third grade, actually across the different years, they have better attendance if they were receiving bilingual services. They also have better grades in their classes and better test scores as well. So overall, it's not only that receiving bilingual services is helping them acquire those English skills, right? But it's also helping them in their classes, and it's actually making them come to school more often. So it really affects all outcomes across the board. So now I'm moving to the second question. It's like, so now we have a couple of things that we know that it works and it can really support students. But can we identify those students that might need more support, different strategies, et cetera, right? You guys know better how to support the students. And what we find, two things are really important that we could use to identify those students. And the first one is the data that comes from the screening test. Like within 30 days of enrollment, students need to be tested for their English proficiency skills. If they say yes in the home language, right, whether they speak another language at home, and etc. So that data is actually related to future outcomes, right? And then in CPS, in Illinois, in pre-K, students are tested with a pre-IPT, and in kindergarten, they are tested with a Model K. So that data is related to what's happening in the future to students. And what we notice is those students that score low in those screeners tended to have lower grades and test score performance. Attendance was very similar. That didn't seem to affect, the different groups of students depending on their initial English levels. But it really was, it shows large differences in grades and test scores. So I'm going to show you the test score graph. What happens in third grade? In CPS, the students were taking the NWA. So we use that data to see what kinds of differences we saw. And the graph on the left is the reading scores in third grade. The graph on the right is the math scores. So we divided the students into the 4 levels based on the Model K when they enter kindergarten. So the bar on the left is the entering, is the lowest one. And in CPS, we have roughly half of the students, half of the English learners are coming in that level. Emerging, developing, and expanding. And what you see is like differences in test scores. So just to give you an idea, the 192 in reading, it roughly corresponds to being in the 32nd percentile in a national distribution of students. While students that were in the expanding, by third grade, they are scoring 201, which is roughly in the 55th percentile of a national distribution, just to give you an idea of how different those two scores look like. So we see big differences in reading. We see differences in math as well, but those are less, right, than what we see in reading. So it really is showing up in reading like different outcomes for the students, especially in reading. But it's also happening in math. It's also happening in their grades, in their classes. So I just said all that already. So screener data, which is available to educators from really early on, we feel like it can be used to identify those students that might need maybe different strategies. And then finally, the last piece is those English learners with identified disabilities have lower attendance and a harder time acquiring English skills. So attendance is the first time we see a group of students among ELs that are having lower attendance. In general, ELs have really good attendance, right, compared to non-ELs across the board. But I think the ELs that have identified disabilities are having some issues attending school. And it's not like they are not learning English skills, they do, but it's just like they do at a slower pace. So to give you an idea, I have a graph here of what they do in kindergarten access on the left. You know, that English proficiency measured by access that they take in February, right, of the kindergarten year. The bars on the right-hand side is the access scores when they are in 3rd grade. So what we see, the bar on the left, the dark blue, those are the students with no identified disability, the English learners with no identified disability. So in kindergarten, their proficiency level on average is 2.4. By 3rd grade, they reach a 3.7, right? So they progress throughout the years. But then when you compare with developmental delay, students that are identified with developmental delay, what you see is like they start lower. Their English proficiency in kindergarten is 1.8. By 3rd grade, they reach 2.9. So they are growing slower, but they are still acquiring English skills, right? So I thought that was important to highlight, right? So students with identified disabilities have a harder time, but it's not like they are still progressing. It's just at a lower rate. But I think attendance is also a big issue with the students that have identified disabilities, right? So if they are not in a school, it's harder to receive the instruction, right, and the support. So I'm just going to conclude with like what big things we found. Factors that are associated with better outcomes: pre-K, especially full day, and receiving bilingual services. And to what extent can we identify students that might need more support? We can use the screener data to do that, and we also know that ELs with disabilities might need more supports or different strategies. So I think we can pause before Rebecca comes. Maybe we can pause for questions if you have a few questions for me about the research, something that I can clarify for you. I think there are a couple of microphones. We can take a few minutes for that.
There's a microphone right behind you.
Okay.
There's also a mic up here if anybody wants to use it from this side.
When you did the research and you looked at the pre-K full-day programs, did you happen to look at the type of programs being play-based or non-play-based? And how many of the pre-K programs were bilingual or have bilingual services? And was that kind of disaggregated? I know it might be like, oh wait, that's a future study, but those were the two questions kind of in my head.
Yeah. So we don't have data on whether it was play-based or not play-based, so I'm sorry, we don't have that information. And then the different types of programs, we had a little bit of information, not a whole lot, and we used that to see if there were big differences. We couldn't find large differences among the different programs. And I think also, I want to point out that the data that we have is from the first 2 years where there were those changes in the requirements for the pre-K programs. So, I mean, I wondered if it was also, you know, trying to figure out, I don't know whether the programs were really well established or not just yet. So I figured that this is something we want to revisit in the future, but right now I don't have that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was so clear.
And this actually might be a comment for the entire audience. I'm really stunned that only, was it 19%, 17% of eligible pre-K English learners are being served in programs. Now I know They might be in some community-based organization programs, but that's still only 20%, no more than 20% that are in the city's school systems. And I know you don't necessarily have the answer or the comment, but I assume you also are really shocked by that low percentage.
So, so the 19% were the students that were, among the ones that were attending pre-K, 19% were in full-day pre-K. 19% were in full-day pre-K. So it's a very small number when we know that a third of non-ELs were attending a full-day pre-K. But actually, I don't know how many of the EL population is attending pre-K. That's another good data that I don't have. But I think it was a little bit shocking to us that there were fewer families taking advantage of the full day. But you know, I think that's another type of research that we would love to do in the future, right? Is it that there are not enough seats in the neighborhoods, which I think CPS is trying to allocate seats to the neighborhoods where we have more Latino families and EL families, or whether just families don't think, you know, they figure that maybe the kid is better at home or in some other setting, right, than a CPS school. So we don't know that part, and it would be great to have some research that can speak to that as well. Okay, so I'll pass it to my colleague Rebecca. You are in for a treat with her.
So excited to
I
talk
know.
about policy, right? And practice, that's why.
Oopsie.
I don't think anyone's ever clapped for policy before, so that's like a first.
I don't know, how
Is
do you
it
know
up?
how to change
Yeah,
that?
I won't be smart enough for this. Can you guys see the screen? Is it on now? All right,
Oh,
awesome.
perfect.
Excellent. So we're gonna situate this study in, I didn't want to bump into you. We're gonna situate this study within policy and practice. I know some of the findings, as Marisa said, for this crowd might be, yeah, we know this, but this is a really important study to have because at the state level, they're talking a lot about preschool expansion. And if you guys been listening to the federal level, it's messy. But Biden is talking a lot about universal preschool. So as we think about expansion, this study is good. This study is great for us. So let's dive in. And this is so strange for me doing it in this way. The main focus of what I'm going to talk about is as the state and nation look to expand preschool, how can this research influence policy and practice for English learners? Because let me tell you, I'm sitting at these tables and English learners are not always brought up. And I think there's often this excuse of, hey, if it's quality preschool, it's quality preschool. When we know that English learners need a specific type of preschool that aligns with our state and federal mandates, right? Yes, clap, people, let's get excited. Let's get excited. So we know there's been a tremendous growth in English learners throughout the state, throughout the nation. But let's also keep in mind, in most states, students are not identified as English learners until kindergarten or first grade, right? So we got something different going on here. And so when we think about this study, I'm trying to preach to the world, you gotta pay attention to this study within the Illinois context, right? Illinois is one of the few states that requires, oh, here's the clicker, now I can walk, that requires English learner services at the age of 3. I actually think we might be the only state that's so early with it. And research and policy at the same time as Illinois has moved in serving ELs that are really young, research and policy have given great attention to the importance of early childhood. And we know, I was thinking about Josie's question, we know not enough kids are in these programs, right? And so we know a lot of these issues can be resolved the earlier, the better, right? So as Illinois and the nation consider expansion of preschool services, we gotta use this study. This is incredibly timely for us. We're a leader when it comes to the size of our English learner population. We're 4th in the nation. And these stats are just looking at our current ELs. As Marisa said, we're trying to open everyone's eyes. You guys know this. You guys know this better than me. But this is just looking at active ELs. This is not looking at the number of kids that have moved through services and exited successfully, right? This is a lot bigger number of kids that have moved through services. I actually think we're around 20, maybe a quarter of kids that have at one time been through this designation. When we talk about it like that, when I'm in like a mainstream audience, ears perk up. Oh, well, this is a much bigger group of kids, right? It's much more significant. When it comes to state-funded preschool, we're also a leader. As of 2017, I thought this was surprising, only 5 states, Illinois, Texas, Hawaii, Washington, Arkansas, and then what a random group, included having a home language other than English as an eligibility criterion for preschool. It's just ELs aren't being considered in these early years at the same way. This graph I think is pretty cool because it breaks down 3 and 4-year-olds. Now, we heard Marisa, the earlier we can get these kids in services, the better, right? We want to get them in at age 3. So we still got a lot of work ahead of us. Texas is doing pretty well. They're ahead of the curve in serving ELs. They actually mandate bilingual pre-K for their 4-year-olds. Now, California, you might say, okay, they're in second place. That looks pretty good. But if you think of the numbers that California has, this is not that great. And they do not have a statewide mandate. We do. We're not doing so bad. We've got some great things going. I know it's not perfect, but if we're going to expand preschool, and a lot of the talks about expansion are outside schools, people are nodding, they know this, right? Because we don't have the seats in schools. We got to think a lot about how we maintain momentum around serving English learners, right, as we expand. So now that we've looked at demographics, I want us just, and I know you guys know this, but I have to really preach this when I go to mainstream audiences. What do we mean by services for ELs, right? So you guys know this, but we've had this in place for a good amount of time now. That means conducting that screener within the first 30 days. It's requiring home language and ESL instruction, and a lot of other early childhood programs, they say dual language learner, they talk about this, but I don't know if it's happening in the same way as when you have a licensed teacher with the bilingual ESL endorsement. We're shaking our heads because you guys inherit these kids at kindergarten. You know what I mean, who's specifically trained in building the home language and building English, right? And this is fundamental for quality. So when I sit at these tables and ELs aren't even mentioned, I'm like, you can't call it quality and you can't call it research-based unless you've got this teacher, right? And ISB for a long time has provided oversight. And this matters. I know Joanne's cringing as she has to talk about accountability, but it is important that we have oversight and accountability. And I worry about it as we just expand service. Thank you, nodding our heads. I got a couple nods because we need to maintain that oversight as expansion happens, or we're going to lose that quality. And I don't need to tell you guys the biggest challenge, right? That's finding qualified teachers. Who's struggling right now to get, I think everyone raised their hand. We needed teachers yesterday, and I am praying, as I know they're having lots of talks at the federal level on this. We can't expand unless we invest in our teachers, right? And we need a federal investment. When's the last time we had a big federal investment in teachers? So it's definitely a critical part of this story. So I just wanted to talk just 1 second about the lack of English learner services in early childhood programs. You heard me clap over here when Marisa talked about how it's not good for kids when parents refuse services. It's not that I think it's not, like, that's great that these kids are refusing, but now we have research. So when you go to an administrator or you get maybe someone that doesn't believe you in your district, you say, look, there is this study with a lot of kids, 16,000 kids, and if they refuse services, this is not good. But I also want us to keep in mind that because preschool's in so many settings, in a subcontract or it's private, if a child is also at a site where EL services are not available, they could be missing a lot of quality in that program. And the net result could be that that child is immersed in English-only programs. So given what we know from this extensive research, that these English services matter in the preschool years, English learner services, we need to ask ourselves if quality is the same across programs. And critical to quality is this licensed teacher with the bilingual ESL endorsement. So here's what we're starting to think about in terms of policy recommendations and practice recommendations. And then I'm going to ask for your feedback. So you guys are not allowed to be quiet like you were when Marisa got done, okay? I'm going to look for you to get alive. I know it's early. Sip your coffee. So we have 2 sets of recommendations. One are for policymakers, decision makers, and early childhood governance structures. And the second are really geared towards educators or just preschool providers in general. The first one is around access, and it's obvious to you all, but again, my audience is a mainstream audience who isn't necessarily thinking about English learners. And that's that we really got to have priority that these kids are having full day services as early as possible, and not just any kind of service, but service that's in compliance with state and federal code. So we're doing advocacy right now at the state level with the Early Childhood Block Grant. Instead of just spreading access, can we push for quality? And by quality, we mean extending the age group and then extending it to full day and making sure that it's in compliance with school code. The second recommendation, again, might seem obvious to you all in having oversight and governance, but we want to maintain this oversight as expansion happens. And again, I can't remind you guys enough, ELs are not always thought about in these discussions. It kind of got a little frustrating for me, to be honest, because it's a good chunk of our kids in preschool. It's about a quarter of the kids in preschool are ELs. So we've got to make sure we pay attention to that. The third policy one, and this is obvious, but we need to invest in building the pipeline. We've got to have qualified teachers. It's inextricably linked to how we're going to implement this. And research shows that a qualified bilingual teacher is one of the most important factors for EL achievement. Practice. Now, how many of you guys were a little surprised about the screener data information that Marisa had? She kind of had some new information here. I got one person nodded out of the whole room. That's it, one person? You're killing me, you guys. Okay, so a key question that we have is how can educators and preschool provider capacity be enhanced to both understand the screener data and take action to serve English learners before kindergarten? Because we just heard a big chunk of kids are entering low on the screener. Raise your hand if you're using the screener data in your district. Okay, maybe about 2/3, right? And so this research shows a new significance about it. And again, we're talking about the pre-IPT screener. So the recommendation that we've had, and again, this just got published, so we're new with these recommendations. If you guys think it's terrible, tell me. But what we're talking about here is local school leaders and preschool providers could develop a system of student identification for English learners who score in this lowest category of the screener, and that these students are targeted for additional language instruction to ensure they're kindergarten ready. Now, we want to be careful that this data is not misunderstood, and someone who doesn't know ELs well puts kids in special ed that might not be, right? I'm getting some head nods. We want to be really careful because this is a time of over and under classification. So I don't have it under policy. I have it under practice because I'm really nervous about this data being misunderstood. So that's where we have that. The second practice consideration is about parents. I'm really excited about the potential here with talking to parents about this research. Our first public forum about this research was more than 300 parents in the bilingual parent councils at Chicago Public Schools. It was awesome to start with parents. My colleague Rosario did it. I can't even take credit. Tons of questions. They found this really interesting, but it's going to start to rev up a lot of questions around access, right? What's actually available. But we have to ask ourselves, what do parents of English learners need to know about what matters for their child's success? Because if you look at a lot of the early childhood educational literature and what's out there for parents, they're thinking about a variety of things for their kids, as we know. They're thinking about flexible scheduling, that totally matters. They're thinking about distance to the program. They're thinking about a lot, especially in the communities we've worked in, extended day, wraparound services. That might be a key reason, right, why they're choosing that service. they might not be thinking about language instruction for their child, right? I'm getting a lot of head nods on that. And so there's got to be a lot of work. We've got this under practice, but I think there's also, if we expand preschool, we're starting to just think outside the box. Could there be certain policy considerations around enrollment, right? So that parents are getting information they know. Because we need to make sure that they know about the benefits of full day pre-K, getting it as early as possible. They really got to know that this research around the detriment if they refuse services for their child. And they all really need to know that if they do have a child with special needs, that they are eligible for both a licensed bilingual teacher and a licensed special education teacher. They don't have to choose. And I know you guys know that, but getting that out to the masses is important. So the recommendation here is about district leaders and preschool providers informing parents. And we're trying to do our best at the forum. We've just started with a one-pager on this research for parents. It's free. We're totally willing to share it. It's in English and Spanish. I'd love to get it in other languages. Money is always an issue, but I would love to get it in other languages. But we just got this forward, and we're also creating a video for parents talking about the research and the different options. But man, this is huge. This is really big. Final recommendation is around English learners with special needs. And so this is about district leaders and preschool providers providing additional supports and language instruction to English learners who have an identified disability. Yes, hands up, people. I love that, like one person gets excited. Educational leaders should make every effort to provide special education services that also follow policies around serving ELs. And a big one that Marisa said too is we really got to pay attention to attendance. I think that's a great discussion to have at the local level, right? Is attendance being compromised by kids who are under both designations? So we're taking some initial steps to publish these findings. I'm working my tail off to figure out how we use this research for legislative and administrative advocacy. We're probably going to need some changes to the Preschool for All legislation to make sure that when it's, I love that, when it's outside schools that we still have oversight for ELs, because again, it's not quality if they're not being served. We're also looking around professional development for school leaders, because I often say really smart, lovely people are at these meetings and the annual bilingual conference, but often these conversations are insular, and mainstream educators are not understanding it. It's, oh, those are your kids over there, right? Instead of these being everyone's kids, and that's something that I think is really important. And again, prioritizing parent engagement, because that is critical. So I think we really have a golden opportunity here to ensure that this research-based best practice is upheld as we undergo expansion efforts. We need to maintain, we've got some good things going, we need to maintain our national lead in serving ELs, because this is how we will ensure equity moving forward. So are you guys awake? Yeah, a little bit? Okay, because we want to know your feedback. I'm actually really curious. We're going to go old school with polling. We're not doing Menti. We're not online. We're not in yoga pants. We want to know, what of these findings do you all think is most important for the public to know? So not bilingual directors, right? But the general public who, maybe it's superintendents when they think about preschool expansion. Maybe it's policymakers. We had two sets of findings. The first one was factors associated with stronger outcomes, right? What we just said, the earlier you access this, the better. The importance that it not just be preschool, but bilingual preschool. So we have that set of findings. But we also had some important findings about extra support for subsets of the EL population. The importance of the screener data and how we could really use this to target kids for more language support. Also support for students with identified disabilities that are also ELs. So if you were forced to choose, we're just trying to get priority. If you're forced to choose which of these findings you think is most important for the public to know, raise your hands if you think it's this first set. Are we like split? Everything's so divided these days. Okay, can somebody be brave and tell me why they think this one's so important? There's money, people are about to get more money maybe.
Right, so like the consortium money and like if we need to have teachers that are bilingual and preschool certified, we need to really have
Do you guys all hear that? So there's a lot of stimulus money that came in under ESSER and under ARPA, and that's like the social services money. A big chunk of it got put into a consortium bill to build the early childhood workforce. And
For early childhood degrees, but if we could be really loud, we could say that it, like, they could make that happen.
Yep.
Where that says, and it includes ESL bilingual endorsement courses for those pursuing their early childhood degrees.
Yep.
And if we could do that, we could build a workforce from our incumbent workers, which
Yep.
addresses the childcare and public school setting.
But a lot of the focus is on getting the bachelor's in early childhood, because you can do that in other settings like Head Start, right? But what we really want is getting to the Pell with the ESL bilingual, which are extra steps. But like you said, we could use the priorities on the current workforce, and that's where we have bilingual folks, right? And so if we're loud and we have this research to say we need to get to the Pell, when I talk to some groups about getting folks to a Pell, they're so devastated by the turnover in childcare workers and the compensation being so low that I look like pie in the sky. Does that make sense? So they're really feeling like it's an important time to say no, but this is actually what we need if we're gonna have quality, right? All right, anyone else wanna say why they think this set of findings are so important? My colleague Rosario is pointing at someone. Oh, yes. You could talk in the mic too, talk loud and proud. We're getting our steps in.
Well, when I looked at the second recommendation, it seems like you need to have a good infrastructure in place, and having a full day bilingual program or a full day kindergarten will allow for more of that second condition to be met. So it seems like, do we have everything in place for it to even happen? We can make the recommendation, but if we don't have the structure there, it's almost working against ourselves.
Yeah, so it's rather sequential.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're totally right. Who's here with the second set? Raise your hand. Nobody thinks this second set should be prioritized. Was she just so convincing, the last woman that talked? Any feelings or reactions to this second set of findings? None at all. We knew this. You guys want your coffee? No reaction at all? Yes. Oh, yes, sorry, there's a...
I think the second set is so specific to educators and education, and you have to do it for the public. For the public, that first one.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Did you guys all hear that? That this is so education specific, it's kind of jargony, right? But there are some folks, I'm going to tell you, if Biden's stuff passes, which we know is messy, it's going to come through Health and Human Services, not through the Department of Ed, which I find very interesting. And there's some state level talks about shifting governance of early childhood. And this is where I'm afraid these kind of recommendations will get lost if it's not under the education umbrella. But yeah, good point. Okay, policy people, you remember you clapped for policy. So we had 3 recommendations around policy. I think I know what you guys are gonna say, but I wanna see. So if you had to choose a priority here, access as early as possible, full day, would you prioritize the governance issue, oversight of these programs? Or would you, and I know this is impossible because they all matter, but I'm asking the impossible, increased investment in teachers. So if you had to prioritize one of these 3 findings, who raises their hand for access? The access is big, okay. How many are with the second one around governance? It's just not a sexy conversation. I think Joanne raised her hand. I think she was the only one. Increased investment in educators, that's a huge one. Does anyone want to say anything about this, particularly in pre-K? You want to say something?
I'd like to just say something in general, if
Yeah.
I could, because I think the issue of finding teachers has always been an issue, and it's not going away. And
Yep.
it seems to be the only policy that's put forward to directors about you just need more people. What I would like, and I'm wondering if there's a discussion about actually looking at the identification and assessment tools that we use, because that could potentially negate the need to convert your entire staff into an EL endorsed staff if you have an identification tool that's reliable. And personally, I'll speak for me, I don't think that the screener is reliable, honestly, in a lot of ways.
I've heard a lot of complaints about it.
I don't know where the numbers come from, I don't know how the score is scored. That's just me. I think the same thing about access as well, is that we get numbers and never an explanation as to how we got that number. Never a discussion about what the difference is between a 3.6 and a 3.9. And we talk about 0.3, and we talk about students who, for example, you have your younger learners in my district. I had this discussion the other day where I have some kindergartners, let's say, who are scoring 6s in listening and speaking, but are scoring 1s in reading and writing. Well, they're 5 years old, so
Yeah.
their literacy is still developing, but because of the math, that child still requires high need services, which means I have to dedicate a person for many instructional minutes to support that child, when that child might just need tier 1 classroom support. So they might just need exposure to grade level curriculum, but now I've still expanded my staffing needs in
Yeah.
order to meet their needs because of the identification and assessment tools that we use. And I don't necessarily see a lot of discussion about whether or not we're doing a good job identifying and monitoring their progress in a way that really truly meets their needs, and instead places an undue burden on the schools
Yeah.
and the staff who work with them.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of folks feel that way. Does anyone else want to comment on that? It sounds like a lot of more need for training and understanding this assessment tools and the data. Yeah? I'm hearing a lot of yeahs on that. Yeah. So then is this idea, this recommendation then, is this off? Developing a system for kids that are coming in low on the screener? How do folks feel about this? Could this, again, so many kids are falling in that lower category that this would put too much of a burden on you all for an increased workforce need? Yeah, Marion. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you go to the microphone? You're especially, I'm sorry.
So it's typical when we screen our kids that they don't know us, okay? And so the first 30 days of school, you try to push into those classrooms so they get a vision of who that person is, but is that a true assessment of that student?
Yeah.
Okay, and you're talking about preschoolers, stranger danger, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so like when you go in there, hey Johnny, how are you doing today? And he's like, oh my gosh, or ¿Cómo estás, mijo? They freak out.
Yeah.
So we might want to take that into consideration when we're saying 30 days for our preschoolers and our kindergartners. Maybe put that out. I'm not going to say change policy or anything, but really look into those dates.
Yep, that it's so early. That's why I definitely don't think there's like a policy mandate around that. I just wonder if folks are using the screener data, especially knowing that it's correlated to these long-term outcomes. And I worry too, if you go outside schools, they're not even screening. Like they're not even screening. I mean, I know there's obviously some legit discussion around better training on the assessments and the assessment data, but we have kids in a lot of settings where you don't even know if they're designated an EL or not. And a lot more in those settings. Marion.
So,
oh, we can't hear you.
sorry. I'm a little bit tall for the stand. I want to go back a little bit to the teacher preparation piece, because I think that with that consideration, we could alleviate some of the concern around misidentifying students in early childhood as English learners because they didn't respond, they were nervous, things like that, because all the students have to be reassessed when they go into kindergarten, right? So at that point, we have the opportunity to make sure that we have properly assessed. But for our early childhood centers, many of us have blended classrooms where we have students who come in with IEPs from the early intervention program. We have English learners, we have students who are like parent-paid, community-based students, where I think we need better teacher preparation, and we need to look to the universities for this too, is we need teachers who come out with the special ed endorsement and the ESL bilingual endorsement.
Yeah.
Because when we have teachers who have those endorsements, if they are identified as English learners, maybe they are, maybe they're not, according to the assessment data, our teachers are prepared to work with our students where they are, give them the preparation that they need to be ready for kindergarten, regardless of their needs. We'd have better MTSS in place. We would probably have less kids identified as special ed as well.
Yeah, yeah. And right now, those teachers are called unicorns, aren't they, when they're,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And increased support on literacy around data, too. So I think we are coming to our time, aren't we? Oh, we're still fine? Were there more?
I just quickly wanted
Oh,
to...
sorry.
Sorry. I just quickly wanted to say that we're asking a lot of education for a field of education that is grossly underpaid, just to work.
Yep.
So I think simultaneously we need to think of ways that we can professionally develop people on the job in ways that actually matter. There's too much professional development that doesn't even change the practice of teachers. So I actually think if someone has a SPED degree, they should be able to scaffold most of the issues for an English language learner. They just need some additional training on language. And that should be able to be provided through continuing professional development in the field, regardless of whether people have the ability to add on the bilingual ESL or not. Because some of the funding for this stuff will not happen.
And if you go outside schools, the discrepancy in pay is, I mean, you have childcare workers that are on food stamps. So I mean, I definitely hear you, it's definitely low in certain public school settings, but it's really low when you get into certain community-based settings. Yes, there's another one. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
just to piggyback. So 2 things that I've noticed. One, we've all talked about it, we just don't have enough teachers. Right now, just a teacher is gold, so
Yeah.
I think that we need to go into the high schools, and I believe a program is already out with CPS where they're going into the high schools and trying to get the high school students to go into the teaching field. But just not that, is also looking at the student teaching component, because I currently have some paras that might not finish because they cannot afford to not work and student teach and not get paid.
So that is a major miscommunication, that they cannot get paid while doing their student teaching. That was changed in policy, and I have not been able to figure out why that hasn't gotten out to the
It
field.
hasn't gotten out to the paras at all because
it
they're
is a
coming
major
to us.
inhibitor. It's a major inhibitor. Yeah, they can't do that.
So then the universities are not telling their students that. And so then there's that lack of communication
Because you're allowed to get paid. while you
Right, they
student
should be
teach.
allowed to get paid. If you're already working as a para, that should just be credit enough. That's just my philosophy. But that's something else that I think we need to look at, is and then the communication that's going on between the university level and the state level, and where's the breakdown. That's it.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Because the diversity is often in our paraprofessional population. Yeah. Yes, Josie.
Rebecca, and I just want to piggyback on the comments from the previous educator on this huge problem we have of underpaying early childhood educators, especially those who are at community-based organizations, et cetera. And I realize that I am curious in this audience what percentage, how many of you don't necessarily have significant early childhood programs in your school districts, because frankly, once you are able to have those early childhood educators, and you might have to steal and rob them from community-based organizations, once they come into your school districts and are working as early childhood educators, they'll be part of the bargaining unit. They will be getting better salaries as a result than the miseria that they're getting at their CBOs. And so that is, I know for our colleagues who are in community-based organizations, we put them in a horrible predicament because that's their livelihood in often cases about that. But I can't see any way out as far as raising the salaries of early childhood educators that sorely, sorely need to be attended to than by having more programs at school district levels, which I realize I'm not saying that bilingual coordinators need to take that on, but you need to start becoming the voice of expanding those services to that population within the school district if we want to especially raise the salaries of early childhood educators. Just a comment.
It's also very racialized. It tends to be poor Black and brown women in community-based organizations that are paid really low. And then as you move up to getting a license and endorsement, it gets more white. Any more questions? Any more comments? You guys itching to get up and move around? Yeah, that's what I think too. All right, well, thank you all so much for giving time.
All right, so I want to give a thank you to Rebecca and Marisa for the really fascinating presentation. Thank you very much. The next round of breakout sessions will start at 11, and we are letting you are dismissed. So there's no need to sit in this room unless you want to. So have a great breakout session. We'll see you back here for lunch.